I don't normally go, or I don't regularly go live on here. I actually haven't gone live on YouTube in a while. I normally do my lives on Instagram, but I want to get back into doing both and doing a little bit more YouTube live. So I don't know how many people are actually going to join me for this one, but I put the word out on Instagram, so we might get some people streaming in as I go along. But anyway, instead of me drawing, which is what I normally do in my live videos, I thought I would look through someone else's work. A really great comic book artist, cartoonist, graphic novelist, whatever you want to sort of call him, Paul Pope. I've made a couple of videos on Paul Pope at this point that are on my channel. He was a huge inspiration on me when I first found out about his work. I was in art school, and one of my teachers, I think it was, sort of showed me his work, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then I went out and tried to get my hands on like everything that he ever put out. So this is the first edition of this book, Escapo, and it's sort of like a maybe it's Escapo. I don't know. I think it's Escapo, but this is like a short story. I snagged this years ago for $5. It was either at the Strand bookstore in New York or maybe Forbidden Planet. But I have a bunch of like rare Paul Pope books, first editions. I have a bunch of THB stuff. Julio, what's up, man? Glad you could join. Um, yeah, I got a bunch of his stuff many years ago, and now all this stuff is super expensive on eBay. But without further ado, let's look through it. You can see my copy is all beat up, but it's all good. He's got a really interesting sense of design, especially at the time. There wasn't much room for this kind of stuff back then in comics. This was probably, I would say, the early to mid 90s. And he was one of those pioneers of like the self-publishing world in comics. So really cool, like end pages and table of contents pages. Really nice design, very different. This is oversized. All this stuff looked very different than like your, Marvel and DC comic of the time. But I think one of the things that sort of drew me in with his work was that, I grew up on Marvel and DC stuff, and by the time I started studying cartooning in college, I was getting turned on to all these like alternative artists and self-publishing comic artists, and some of it really spoke to me. But it was this kind of stuff that really spoke to me, just because it was like a good entryway, because it kind of felt a little bit like mainstream comics. That's Paul Pope, one of the early sort of, like, I guess what he was like, almost had like a personal brand, that wasn't necessarily big back then at all for an artist to like show themselves, or like have like a, kind of like a professional photo of themselves in their comics. So this was before, social media and all that kind of stuff. There's another picture, him walking through the streets, and his own artwork is plastered on the walls. It's kind of a cool image. Julio, looks very similar to your work. I can see the influence. Yeah, for sure. There was a point when I first discovered Paul Pope's work where, like, I would say that summer, I was like a Paul Pope copycat, like just relentless. I was probably like 19 years old, and I was making comics, and all my comics were like a really bad version of Paul Pope comics. I was trying hard, but I've since, moved away from that. But I think when you get really inspired by somebody and you have those like moments where you're really absorbing a lot of their work, even if you kind of like don't follow their work as closely anymore or really care to necessarily have that same sensibility. I think it's still like you absorb so much of it that it's still kind of like in your blood, your artistic blood. So yeah, I think this stuff still shows through. I was super impressed by his just ability with the brush. The first few pages of this book are, it's like a little separate short story. Super cool stuff. Really interesting colors too. I never know how to best like display these things when I'm on live, because I'll look through I'll watch other people's like look through videos of certain comics, and I always want them to like get closer. So that's what I'm trying to do. I hope this is visually pleasing. Sometimes it's so far away that it's hard to like see the actual work. But if I do post this on my channel afterwards, perhaps you could, if you want, you could like screenshot some of these, some pieces if you're interested. This book has been reissued, I think, several times recently in the last like few years. You'll see the rest of this book, the actual story itself. This is just an intro. The actual story itself is all black and white, but they recently, I would say within the last like 5 to 7 years, colored it all and then reissued it. So that's, I think, pretty easy to find now. I mean, look at that brushwork. It's so beautiful. Julio, I miss the color magenta in old school comics. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he does have that punk rock style. I can see that. A lot of influences of like zines and posters. And just a page like this, let me try to like zoom out. Like that's just a really nicely designed, like, boom, you just got that pin up right against the white and the text right there. I think that's really cool. Yeah, then the story itself starts. I'm probably not gonna go through every single page, just because we'll be here for a while. Although it's not the longest story, sort of like a short story, but yeah, check out that brushwork. And his originals, I've been fortunate enough to see his original art. He had a couple of shows in at the Society of Illustrators. That's a pretty intense panel right there. You definitely wouldn't see that in a Marvel or DC comic. Damn, look at that. Really like powerful storytelling, really in your face, very raw, fast. If this were music, it wouldn't be soft indie rock or something like that. There'd be a lot of power to this music, and I responded to that when I first saw it. Like, I love the fact that there's so much going on in this image. It's such a great opener, and then if you start to look closely, this stuff is really there's a lot of expression in these lines. It's not super tight and noodled, but it has so much information. And when you zoom out, for me, there's just so many beautiful lines going on. It just feels like it's bouncing off the page. And it looks as though, like, look at that. That's just lettering done right on the board. Boom. No fonts. This was long before you could buy fonts and type them on the computer. Like I said, I think this is like the mid 90s. I could be wrong, but I think so. The main character is sort of like a Houdini type of circus act guy. But I just love that stuff. This is like the kind of stuff I was trying to do when I was trying to copy him that one particular summer. Hey Jenny, is this one of your favorite art? Oh, Nisi, how you doing? I know you from my Instagram lives. Yes, this is Paul. He's certainly one of my favorite artists. Definitely a big influence on me when I started like really like studying comics, and I've always been a comic book fan and always wanted to draw comics. But when I started really like trying to dissect and study comics, um, he's one of the artists that really like turned things around for me, because I noticed that like wow, you could a make a story that doesn't have to be based around a superhero, but it could still have like power and action and dynamic drawing. Great use of negative space. Yeah, I agree. Obviously, there's only black and white here, but you don't. It doesn't feel like you're missing anything. You know, there's so much. Um, it's so expertly done that I don't know. This in a weird way, it feels like it's already in full color. And if I'm being honest, the colored version that they put out a few years ago, I don't think it really does it justice. I much prefer this in black and white. I think it just really sings this work. Look at that. I mean, you could hear that machine rattling, the blades, ringing together. You could see it kind of moving off the page, just with these simple to sort of comprehend, but not easy to do. These sort of lines. I think it's awesome stuff. Anyway, I think what I was trying to say before was that I've been fortunate enough to see some of his original art, and it's very, very big. He works, I don't know the exact size that he works, but it's much closer to like 18 by 24, I want to say. Very large. It might be bigger. It's certainly not 11 by 17, which is your sort of traditional mainstream comic making format. Look at that. He does that like European format too, where it's wide and it's all full bleed. All the panels go straight to the edge of the paper. That's like super European. A lot of his layouts are very much inspired by European comics. Paul Pope is an American, though. Look at that. So cool. And again, like, he's not a superhero. He's sort of like a Harry Houdini kind of guy, um, who's a circus performer. But it has that vibe, for a kid who grew up on superheroes and cool looking comic art. This stuff really spoke to me. But it had this thing about it that was so different than what I was used to. Look at this water. I mean, I'm going to just hold this here, try to zoom out, get the whole thing. Yeah, if you want to screenshot, whoever's watching, if you want to screenshot some of this stuff, because that water is just like so well done. Water, clouds, those are really difficult things to draw and to ink and to make it feel like it's actually like a living, moving kind of thing. But I had a teacher in art school that would always like reiterate to us that when you're drawing certain things or painting certain things, he was a painter, but he would say that like, if you're drawing water or inking water, think about, you know, water, like try to be water in a weird way, not in anything like a sort of overly wise, you know, Bruce Lee way, but you know, really try to get into it. And you could, it almost feels like he's like just like thinking about water here. Um, Jenny says, "You say water funny." I've heard that said to me before. I can't help it. It's my New York accent. Jen, having recently tried to ink water, this is just incredible. Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad this is inspiring. Um, sorry, I think that, I don't know, trying to get rid of the, let's see, I can't really, I'm still getting used to YouTube Live. So all the comments are now up and I can't really see the screen. But anyway, we'll try to power through. Julio says, that's Brooklyn and us. Yes, it's hard to go away. It's true. It's very true. Hold on a second. There we go. But I think that's really cool how his faces are like super expressive. Sometimes they're a little bit like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like ugly. But I like it. I like how he just kind of like gets into everything that he's drawing. I think he's also, or I've heard, he's very much influenced by manga as well. He used to live in Japan at a certain point. I think he spent like a year or two living in Japan and making uh, comics for some like Japanese publisher out there, and very like manga esque. I think some of that shows through in here. I don't really know much about manga, but as a novice, I could see where there's sort of like a manga vibe to this stuff, especially like how these scenes are like pages long. Like there might just be this one scene that for perhaps like in an American comic, if this was like a superhero comic, this might be a page and a half, but he's just sort of dragging it out in a great way, you know, 7, 8, 9 pages. That's that like manga pacing. A lot of like action lines, speed lines. You'll see though, it gets like there's like calm parts of the story too. So there's interesting like he plays with timing a lot where there's a lot of action. You could hear it. It sounds loud. It sounds like there's a lot of things going on. You can almost hear the guy who's like narrating everything with the you know, the horn that he's talking through. Julio says, "Are you a Klaus fan?" I'm assuming you mean Klaus Janson. Yeah, he's one of the best inkers out there for sure. In my opinion, I think he's one of the best inkers to ink John Romita Jr. He's really got such a great line. Do you mind if we share your videos? Not at all, of course, man. Please do. Jen says, in the expression being kind of funny, ugly, that reminds me of manga. Not, sorry, it's hard to see. Not something to go there for the storytelling. Sorry, there's like something blocking the comment. I'm still getting used to this YouTube format. But yeah, I could see the faces kind of have a manga-esque vibe to them as well, for sure. I feel like Paul Pope, from all the years of being a fan of his and sort of talking with other people about his work, he's almost like a polarizing artist. No one is like sort of like you know, what's the word, in the middle about Paul Pope. Everybody, you either love him or you don't like his art at all. And I've met people who don't care for it, and I get it to some extent, some of the criticisms that people might have of his art, but I really like it. I guess I'm one of those people that kind of speaks to me. Here's a much like more subdued storytelling scene, but I think it works really nice. He's gone on to do many comics. It tends to take him a while in between projects. I don't know what he's working on now or what's going to come out next, but the last book, as far as I know, the last book that he put out was like a young adult comic called Battling Boy, which was very much inspired by manga. It's about this kid that like can channel the powers of animals just by putting on different shirts. So like he'll put on like a tiger shirt and then he becomes like a tiger. He could do things that a tiger could do, and then like a monkey or stuff like that. It's a very interesting concept. But it was a big book, like it was very thick, and the Society of Illustrators, when it came out, they had a whole exhibition of the originals from that book, and it was like, oh my god, I think I saw that show 3 times just to look at. I paid every time too, but yeah, it was amazing stuff. I took photos years ago when I went. I still have them, but they're, like I said, they're really big. I want to say maybe even bigger than 18 by 24. And when you look at his brush strokes up close, you see how like expressive they are, and why he works that big. It's not slick, it's not polished, he's not noodling, but there's a lot of just craftsmanship that goes into his pages. Like to see even just like a face like that in person, it's going to be like 4 times up, and you'll see like all the brushy things going on there. It's hard not to want to run home and just like start brush inking like crazy. Look at that. That's a full page. Boom. It's cool. I think it's very like intriguing. It's an interesting composition. A sort of like mainstream editor might not like that, if you turn that in as an artist. Whereas like something like this is just, to me, I don't know, for lack of a better word, maybe it's artistic. Not to say that other comics aren't, but it has that kind of like that vibe where it's referencing other kinds of art outside of its own genre. Anything like netting is such a pain in the ass to draw. He's got so much of it in this comic. I think he does it really, really well. And his older stuff like this, that lettering, as far as I know from what I've seen, is done right on the board. So it's so integral with the art itself. Look at that, a lot of netting. Just a nice full page right there. Really interesting, like just designs too. I think that's one of the things that sort of like appealed to me with his work, is that it seemed to me, especially at the time, very unique. And I still believe it is. I think though, as I've gone on in my sort of comic book education, there are very specific artists that you could tell that he's influenced by. Most of them like either European or Japanese. Jen says, is there a term for that kind of lettering where it's integrated into the illustration? I don't know if there's a specific term for it. I think it's just old school. Like those old Marvel, DC comics, all that stuff the lettering was right on the board, which had so much like, I don't know, when you, even after it's printed and you're reading it, when you look back on those comics, there's a certain kind of energy that it has. And I think that there's like, it's left over from like so many different hands touching the actual board. Nowadays, it's just files going back and forth. As far as I know, it's funny. This is like a little bit like an after. I'm looking at the font now. It almost looks like, to me, maybe I'm wrong, it looks like this is a font. These are fonts, and then in these more action scenes where this guy's talking and there's a lot of sound effects, that stuff looks like it's done right on the board. And then this stuff looks like it's starting to look like now. But anyway, handling when it is done and when it was done more in mainstream comics, the way they would do it is that the penciler would pencil the page, then hand it off to the inker, sorry, to the letterer, and then the letterer would ink all the letters and the word balloons and the caption boxes all right onto the penciled board, and then turn that over to the inker. So it's kind of like a interesting process. So the inker would really be inking around all the stuff that the letterer did. So it really just like everyone's responding to everyone else. So it like feels like one piece of cohesive art. I think some computer lettering, some of it looks great, and then some of it just lays so flat on the, you know, on the page that it almost looks like a foreign substance. It just draws too much attention to itself. I always thought this was such an awesome panel. So quiet. It really feels like nighttime. How do you, you know, communicate nighttime with just black and white in a comic? No color, no special effects. That's how you do it. Just all those like cast shadows, all that. You know, he's not afraid to just go black. The sky, it's black, and there's stars. So for as much like energy and sort of action and power that the early part of this book has, there's some really nice quiet moments too that I think are really nice. That's in on the end pages here. That's that same shot. It's just the penciled version, which is kind of cool. Jen says, was the penciler being conscientious of space for the letterer, or did they have to figure where to put it themselves? That's a great question. They were being conscientious of it. If you see like old penciled pages of like John Romita or Buscema, they would indicate, it would be roughly, there would be like a rough word balloon. Even some of the lettering would be in there, not ruled out or anything like that. But yeah, you know, a good comic artist, even nowadays, I mean, you really have to take into account that there's going to be, if there is going to be word balloons, you have to take into account where those are going to be. And even sometimes I work on comics all day, and I sometimes have to remind myself that too, because sometimes I'll create a really great composition within a panel, and then I'm like, oh no, I forgot this whole person's saying this like really long piece of dialogue. So I'll have to sometimes rework it. But yeah, this is really, this whole like nighttime scene. There it is again, by the tree. And I mean, look at that. And this, like he's going like, just like, wow, it's really, really dark out. You know, and so I think that a lot of us might shy away from going that dark, but I think it really just sets the mood and the tone of the scene. And it's really rough too. I mean, if you were to see these in person, this would be, there'd probably be a lot of white paint around there. It's very expressive. And as he went on, as his career goes on, he does get tighter. Some of this stuff is like very loose, but he always maintains that liveliness to his work. And it's kind of funny because almost every comic that he makes, the character looks exactly like him, which is kind of interesting. He kind of casts himself in all his comics. I think that's one of the criticisms of people who aren't a fan of his art. I don't mind it. I think it's an interesting thing to do. It's like the directors that sort of put themselves in all their movies. Uh, that almost reverse inking with negative space is so cool. Yeah, totally. Yeah, sometimes there's so much black on the board that he's almost like carving out with white. I mean, that page. Look at that. That's a really great. Like there's compositionally that this character is so weird and eye catching. You can't help but like stop and look at it. And then there's all those little lines, and I mean, if you get up close here, so much like interest that you just keep looking at it. For me, I think that's one of the appealing things of his art. And although there's so many different lines and different kinds of mark making, look at how much white, white empty spaces around there to sort of balance it out. If he filled this whole backdrop with more people and then the tent of the circus and all that kind of stuff, it would just get too much, and it would almost like hurt to look at it. So, when you look at a piece like this, there's so much going. There's so many lines, but really, I'd say 30% of it is just empty white space. So it's very smart compositionally. Same here, like with this panel. Really draws attention to what's going on here. To have all that white space. All this stuff looks definitely like he hand inked that with a brush. So cool. And he really paces these scenes out. Some of these scenes, like I said, this whole book probably could have been, if this was like, if you really wanted to, you could probably do this whole thing in like 15 pages, but he's like really drawing out these scenes and playing with the pacing, which I think is really nice. Slows it down. It feels very cinematic. Look at that. I mean, it's so like expressive and rough, but it reads so clearly. Awesome. Look at that. I think that's it. Let's see what we got here. Yeah. Here's another pencil sketch. And then that's it. Like I mentioned early on, I got this thing for $5. I want to say either at the Strand bookstore or Forbidden Planet in New York years ago. Either someone didn't know what they had, or I don't know. I've gotten some really great deals over the years, especially on Paul Pope stuff. There's a self-published series that he put out for years, and apparently he says that it's still gonna keep going. I don't think he's put out an issue in probably 15, 20 years, but it's called THB, and they're single issue comics, and they have different stories in them, and they're so beautiful, really weird, like sci-fi, almost like European sci-fi style, a little Mobius like, and it has a manga influence to it as well. I have all those issues too. It's just that I don't have them with me. I was in New York recently, and I pulled this out of my collection just because I wanted to have it closer by, and sort of get re-inspired by his work again, because as you can see, there's a lot to be inspired by. So cool. I hope you dug this. This is a little different. I want to do more of these. I brought a whole stack with me back home, back here, and I'm hoping to maybe go through some more of those. I have some really cool stuff. It's to the side right now. I don't want to spoil anything, but here's one. Speaking of he's kind of in the world, I think, of Paul Pope. They sort of came up around the same time. We're both very successful in self-publishing. This is Mike Allred. He has a very popular comic called Madman, which still goes on today, but it started in the early 90s. And I'll just a quick sneak peek. You can see there's a similarity there between him and Paul Pope. I think Madman's a little bit more rooted in like old superhero comics, particularly Jack Kirby. But yeah, this is awesome stuff. And this is an old issue that I had. And I thought maybe we could look through this. I have a bunch of other stuff too. So yeah, I'll either do it here or on Instagram. I used to go live here on YouTube much more often. And so maybe I'll try to do that a little bit more often as well. Just sort of bounce back and forth between here and Instagram. So keep your, I guess, notifications on. I think there's YouTube notifications for when someone goes live. But yeah, at the very least, just subscribe to my channel and you'll probably get some sort of message if I do go live. So cool. I'll get this out of the way. We were looking at this just to close it out. So yeah, thanks for watching and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.